Hi, everybody. This is Jeffrey from Ripe Color, and
Hi, this is Nancy Jean in the garden.
welcome to the first Tarot Tuesday. This was a little idea that I had to add like new information or new programming to my channel.
Mm-hmm.
So Nancy naturally is going to be my first guest as we read daily. We read together daily.
Right.
So I thought, because some people are like, oh, I really like the way you interpret the cards, la, la, la. Okay. So I figured we would go through the deck. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we're going to start with the first card in the deck, which
Yes.
is
Dun, 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 dun.
the Fool.
Yes.
0. So I thought we would both talk about what our interpretation of the Fool card is. So since you're my guest, why don't you begin?
Okay. The Fool, this is the deck. It's Eileen Connolly. This is the Fool I most normally read. And he's got all the elements of Jeffrey's Fool. He's got the little white dog. The only thing is you don't see the cliff he could walk off of, but he's at a crossroads and he has to make a decision about which way to go. And when it shows up for me, that means people are at the beginning of something or at the very end of something, and they're ready to go off in a new direction. And I've always read that the little is interpreted as his spirit directing him, like sort of nipping at his heels.
Yes.
Another deck that I like the representation of the Fool is this one, and it's called Luna Soul. And this was done by a Spanish artist but it was published in the Netherlands. And if you can see, he is at the precipice of a cliff, and it's like he's got to move one way or the other. He's going off the cliff, and there's a little salamander next to him that's not a cute little dog. I guess that was what was nipping at his heels. But he's got that same thing, but it's always very sunlit and open and feeling like it's an adventure you're on, and you just have to make a decision about which way to go. Then I have another deck, and I use this a lot on my own channel on the garden. It's called the Inner Child deck. And in this deck, all the major arcana are fairy tale characters. And this is Little Red Riding Hood. And if you think about it, she goes off heading off to grandma's, and then she wanders off the path and she runs into the big bad wolf. And she has several different outcomes. It depends on which story you were told as a child. I lived with a family that didn't want me to have nightmares forever, so I heard she got away from the wolf. But there are other ones where the wolf gets to Granny's first and eats her up. But it's all about the adventure of her. It's the beginning and the starting of where we go with our journey. And when I used to teach tarot, if you lay out the major arcana from the Fool on up to the World, it's really a path we all take in our lives in all sorts of respects.
Right.
And I often would say to people, okay, where are you in the major arcana right now with this?
Right.
So I think the Fool's an open-mindedness, a kind of adventurism. You need to watch out for what could be the pitfalls, because you could walk off that cliff.
Sometimes the Fool is as simple as being foolish.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just that simple. Right.
But I had a friend once, and I read for her quite a bit because I worked in a store she ran. And I'd tell her she was getting a lot of the Fool stuff because she was really at a point in her life where she was at a lot of crossroads and she's making a lot of decisions. And finally, one night when I was reading her, she said, "Why do you keep calling me a fool?" And I had to go back and explain the whole archetypal meaning of fool. And it doesn't mean a foolish person. It means a person making a decision. Now, I have laid the Fool card where the card screamed at me, and this person you're reading is one. But it's not the norm. Normally, it's people who are just seeking new information and how to balance their life.
Yeah. Sometimes I see the Fool as there's an aimlessness. It's almost like a leaf in the air. It's sort of like whichever way the wind blows is whichever way I'm going to end up. So there's a certain trust, but there could also be a certain naivete. There's a certain sense of, for me also, there's a sense in the Fool of not yet being born. It's almost like pre-incarnation. So
Mm-hmm.
there's um, like a naivete and a trust and a certain innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a sense of really being your own person, of like
Right.
not fitting in with the norm. I mean, look what he's wearing.
No,
Look
I
what
know.
he's
Well, yeah.
wearing. It's sort of
It's
like,
divine. I think it's divine.
yeah,
But
it's
yeah.
the best outfit in the whole Tarot.
Mm-hmm.
And
What are the plants? What are the flowers that are on him? Because
I
my
think
fool,
well, without my glasses,
my fool's carrying a rose, and I've always heard that almost always they
it's a
have a
white
rose.
rose. It's a white
Yeah.
rose. Right,
This guy's carrying a rose, and this guy's carrying a rose in
right.
his hand. You
Purity,
can't see it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
purity. So that's like purity
Mm-hmm.
of soul. So that's why it's also, it ties into that. It's unborn because it's a zero. So the
Mm-hmm.
zero is a really interesting number in that the zero encompasses creation and chaos. So the fool is very like, roll the dice, anything can happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything can happen. Like that's the energy of the fool. It's sort of,
Mm-hmm.
it's not real, it's not really focused. It's really like, yeah, nah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Take a
So
direction.
yeah, and it's almost like there's an aimlessness, a directionlessness, but there's also a sense of freedom. There's tremendous freedom in the fool.
Mhm.
It's sort of like,
Well, it is definitely got newborn energy because I
yeah,
always think of a fool. I always think of that time before you cross the bridge when you've picked up whatever your astrology you're going to carry across or whatever map you've laid out for yourself to come across with it. And you just, yeah, that's all going to work out fine. I mean, I can't believe any of us would cross the bridge if we didn't believe that,
right, right, right. Then
and
jump in the water even though you can't swim.
mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm,
yeah. Let's see what happens. Or I wonder what that feels like.
mm-hmm. And let's see, this one has more. This is definitely someone who was from Spain or Mexico, the way it's drawn. Whereas this guy has White Cliffs of Dover behind him.
Yeah, and quite the colorful outfit.
Oh yes, he's pretty marvelous too. I like his little doggy.
And the dog is definitely the soul, because that goes back to ancient times. So the understanding of the dog, because the dog is the most loyal. So it's almost like our guardian angel, our
Mhm.
soul being with us throughout the whole journey. And it's like, I'll follow you wherever you go. Right.
Right. And when you take this card apart, she doesn't have a dog, but she has a butterfly
Mm.
on the end of her
There's
finger.
also
A soul.
the soul, right?
So a lot of times when you look at these cards, when I lay out cards to read them, and I do read cards quite a bit, not that I do it that much on the screen, but when you're looking at these images, your eyes will go to one part or another of the card.
Right.
And you'll pick one part or another of the cards. Now, this particular deck, if you look at the back, there's obviously an up and a down. And this card was never meant to be read in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
The artist didn't design it that way. This artist also did not design their cards to be read in reverse. They have a really brief, if it shows up in reverse, it's really brief. Now, this card, if you look at the back, you don't know which way is up, right?
Right.
So, and I read reverses. I know there's a lot of readers who don't. I think it denies you a double vocabulary that you can have out of any deck.
Mm-hmm.
And the fool reverse, when he shows up standing on his head and I'm reading people, I'm going, boy, you just don't want to make a decision. You don't want to start something new. You don't want to move on.
Mm.
Or if they're at the end of a cycle, if they have a lot of late numbers, because the fool is at the beginning when you lay out the major arcana, he's also at the end. When you go all the way up to the world, then you get back to the fool.
Right.
So he's part of the infinity
of
the cycle of the cards.
Yeah. Great.
Just take your cards out and look at them, see what they look like.
And then you're right. So that's one thing. And then, so let's say you're doing a Celtic cross, right? And you throw down the fool as the heart of the matter, the first card. So I'm just going to pull any card. Okay. So I pull out the 5, right?
Mhm.
So, it's sort of like this. So to me, it's like well, this is the way I read.
Mhm.
So like if this is the heart of matter and this is what crosses it, they could also reverse. It's not, for me, it's never set in stone with that, because to me,
Mhm.
that's one entity. Like when I pull 2
Mhm.
cards, it's really, for me, it's one entity.
Mhm.
So, this could don't be foolish as to who you're following, you know, um, uh, you know,
Don't be foolish about what you pick up and take off the battlefield and what you leave behind. Think it
right,
through.
right. Very good. That was really good. Yeah. Yeah. What are you taking with you? So it's kind of like, okay, so what does this card mean? And what does that card mean? And then how do I make a story? And the way to make a story and the way to make an understanding is to keep on practicing until what you say, makes sense,
Mhm.
to either in here or in here or in here. People like, oh, well, that's not the meaning of the card. It's like, the cards have 1,000 meanings. The cards
They
have
do, and
1,000 meanings.
they're colored by, are they in the past? Are they in the future? When I do a Celtic cross, I believe anything that's beyond the 2 that are crossed and then the one below and the one next to it, which are kind of the past cards, that energy's happened, and you can learn to live with it, learn to accept it. The card that's in the future, you can turn. That's why I love tarot, because you have free will and you can turn those cards around. And that's what the importance of knowing what cards are about, so that you don't feel we're not trapped by our fate.
Right,
And it's not written in stone or in a card.
right,
You That's your flexibility.
right, right,
And I know people who just get decks and then they never read the books that come with them. In
right.
the case of the inner child card, this is the book that comes with it. I mean, it's fat. There's big pages on everything.
Wow.
And it's so well worth reading and comparing to because every time I get a new deck, I learn a new way of seeing the cards.
Yeah. And I learn a lot from other readers that I watch,
Mhm.
because sometimes I hear someone interpret a card in a way I've never interpreted. I was like, that makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
Like I'm totally down with that. Or sometimes I hear them, and for me in that moment, I'd be like, I'm not really sure, but it might be floating around in my head, and it might come back to say, oh, in this particular reading, that's the way to do it. So I think but I think the way to learn to read the cards is by reading the cards.
Yeah, that's the only thing
As
you can
simple
do.
as that.
Read cards.
It's as simple as that. And like when you're first getting started, people are like, oh, I have to do the Celtic cross. It's like, keep it simple. Do 2 or 3 cards. Do a 1 card reading,
Mhm.
right? Do a 1 card
Right.
reading, right? So if somebody would ask for, say, like a health reading on the Fool, it would be like, well,
It's
you
in
could
your
take a
hands.
chance. You
Mhm.
could, you might be being, it could be, but you have to go with more than just what the card says in the book. It's also about what you see in the card, what you feel from the card, what you basically are hearing, because that is the key that helps you to tap in, because that's what makes you a different reader than every other reader.
Well, and you have to read with your own eyes and your own experience. But
Absolutely.
one of the things I've noticed is if you do something like a Celtic cross, I did one, I have in my entire, and I've been reading cards since I was 12, guys. One time in my life, it's only 10 cards out of the 70 plus cards that's in the tarot deck, right? It's 10 cards. This woman got all 5 10s.
Wow.
And 10 means something's ending. It's like done. When you start getting multiples of 10s, it means wherever you've been, it's over. You better get ready for change.
Right.
If you get a lot of 1s, it means you're at the beginnings. And so you have to look at the numbers. Now, if your numbers are scattered all over the place, it means whatever project you're working on is in various stages. And you pick that up, and the only way you can do that is to read.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a reader the other day, and she's talking about when she started out, and she used to just go sit at this bookstore that had kind of a reading area and a kind of sit down area. And she asked them, can I sit here and read my cards? And they said, sure. And she would sit, and inevitably people would come up and say, you're a card reader. And she said, well, I'm learning. And she made it real plain to them that she was learning. And she would sit there and read their cards. And that's where she developed her
Yeah, yeah. Years
Her
ago, my
skill.
friend worked at a bar, but it was more like a service bar. It wasn't like a bar, like it was a restaurant. So,
Mhm.
he would occasionally serve food to people there that were kind of waiting for a table. So
Right.
it was a real service bar. So he
Mhm.
had to make his drinks, but he always had time. And people would sit there waiting for a table because it was in Midtown, like near Times Square.
Right.
So this is a long time ago, and I would bring cards and practice and this and that. So there was this couple that came young. I don't even know what cards I pulled, but I pulled. What did I pull? I pulled all the marriage cards. I pulled
Mhm.
the lovers. I pulled the Hierophant. I pulled
Mhm.
the Justice card, and I'm getting
Mhm.
all these like law and the Two of Cups, and
Mhm.
it was like
And the
and
Four of
again,
Wands. Here's the
it
wedding.
was like unbelievable. And then I pulled the Four of Cups, and it just like flew out of my mouth. I said, "He wants to marry you. What's your problem?"
Mhm.
And they both look at each other like, "Oh, how could you know that?" It's like it was, sometimes a reading comes out that it's so clear, because sometimes they come out, it's like, oh, I don't really know. Is this one more important? And. But sometimes
Mhm.
it's like, oh, I got the Two of Cups. I
Mhm.
got the lovers. It's like,
Mhm. And the other thing I tell you is just read the cards. If you're not sure, just read the cards that are in front of you. The
right.
first psychic fair I ever worked was in my 30s. And I don't know if you've ever been to one, but it's like a ballroom full of tables and there's readers there. And of course, when I was doing it, I was like a newbie reader. I had a stack of business cards that said Nancy Jean Tarot, and that was it,
Right.
my phone number. But these other people had elaborate,
Hmm.
pictures and all these things. And I didn't even have any crystals on my table at that point. And I was sitting there and they open the doors and they let the people come in and they all walk around and they kind of look at some go right to the reader they want because they've known them from before.
Right.
But I was a newbie and I thought, I'm going to sit here all afternoon. And this woman came up and she walked in and her hair looked like she styled it with a Cuisinart. She had a striped top, horizontal stripes, and she had on plaid shorts. And then she had on a pair of shoes that had seen a better day.
Hmm.
And I was like, and she kept going around looking at everybody's table. And every time she passed their table, they'd go, thank God, Um, and because if you judge a book by its cover,
That's
this
right.
was not the person you wanted to read.
Right.
And so I was sitting there and she walked past my table and I thought, oh God, thank. And then she circled back and she sat down. She goes, and she's from East Texas. Nancy Jean, you're going to read my cards. I was like, oh no, because I was used to friends and people I kind of knew a little about. Anyway, she sat down and I laid out her cards and I couldn't believe that I've started off with what's going on around you for the next 3 months in a Celtic cross. And this woman had money coming in. She had boyfriend problems because they were all hot after her. She had all this stuff. So finally, I just read the cards and she goes, well, you sure did get that right. That old Frank, he thinks he's going to marry me for my money. He's not going to get my money. I mean, but she was a good old East Texas girl, and it ends up she'd inherited some businesses from her parents, and she'd done extremely well.
Hmm.
And she just liked being out where she was, you know. And I lived in Dallas at the time, and Dallas at the time was so dressed for success, and everything
Oh,
had
I
to
know,
be,
I know. I used to go to
yeah,
Dallas then. Yeah,
yeah.
rings on everything,
So,
but yeah.
so anyway, at the end, she stood up and she said, "Well, I answered her some questions about some business, and she had a business partner she thought was ripping her off, and it was true." And I said, "This is how they're doing it." She said, "That's what I couldn't figure out." Anyway, she got up to leave, and I said, "Why did you pick my table? I saw you went around to every other table in this place." And she said, "Oh, what's your name?" She said, "My favorite baby doll was Nancy Jean."
Hmm.
That's how I got my name. That was my mother's favorite baby doll, was named Nancy Jean.
Mm.
So I got the total understanding. I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
It
yeah,
all
yeah.
works.
Yeah.
But her cousin came up, and her cousin was a total different from her. Her cousin looked like she'd been styled at Neiman's because she'd been styled at Neiman's.
Hmm.
And she came up and she sat down. She said, "I want to get a reading from you." She said, "Because you were so accurate about my cousin." And she said, "I know how she looks and I know how she acts, but that woman's brilliant and you saw it." And I said, "The cards saw it." I mean, And I read The Cousin, and the cousin was going to take her sister to Neiman's to get her hair, the cousin to Neiman's to get her hair done. That will, I'm sure they would be loving that at Neiman's. But anyway, she, so all I can tell you is my very first reading, I had an astrologer who said, just read what's in front of you. That's how you do this. Just read what's in front of you. So read what's in front of you. And if you think it's going to be sketchy, or you think, I mean, don't hurt anyone's feelings, but open your mind up and don't say that can't possibly be true. So I'm just going to pat it.
Right.
I mean, I just read.
Right.
Read what you see.
Read what you see. Wonderful.
And, and I hope that helps everyone take their step off the ledge and go forward. I think every time I read, I have to sit down and go kind of through that fool thinking, I can do this again today.
I agree. Well, that was a very successful Tarot Tuesday.
Woo!
Maybe I'll have Tarot Tuesday t-shirts made.
Put the fool on them.
Yeah, exactly. Upside down and right side up and diagonal.
Yeah, whatever works.
Exactly. All right.
So
well,
thank you for inviting me, Jeffrey. I'm glad to help
you.
you kick off your series.
Thank you. I'm excited. So now I have to,
Now you have to go find other readers. Maybe if
That's
other
not
readers see
hard.
it and they want and they want to participate, maybe it's one you don't know.
Yeah. No, because so many people have featured me on their channel, and I never really knew, really. But it's like, oh well, let's find something in common. It's like, well, everybody likes deviled eggs, so I'm going to invite everybody who likes deviled eggs to my party.
And there's not a card I do have a card that has deviled eggs in it, but it's kind of a weird deck.
Okay. Is it the two of pentacles?
I don't.
The hostess is like, oh, my deviled eggs are going to fall off the tray.
Anyway, well, thank you for inviting me on, and everybody watch him and watch us when we do our daily duo, which is now an international daily duo.
Oh, international. Yes. Blessings, and thank you for joining me. And I'll see you very soon.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we'll see all of you very soon. Blessings.
Bye.